Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the annual convention on the Global South 2024. Global South in Geopolitical Turbulence. And I'm Julian, and welcome to our second agenda, an academic seminar discussing Global South and the decolonization of knowledge. Early this morning, we have conducted a hybrid two-session roundtable discussion. It was a fruitful discussion indeed. And now we will begin our academic seminar. Thus, for our fellow audience who want to raise a question, please feel free to type your question in the chat box. Or you can also use the raise hand feature during the question and answer session. And to begin our seminar, let me introduce our chair for this academic seminar. He is Mr. Muhadi Sugiono, Master of Arts. He is a lecturer at the Department of International Relations, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Mr. Muhadi's area of expertise includes peace and security, theory of international relations, and a geographical focus on Europe and the Global South. He currently serves as the coordinator of ICES, stands for Indonesian's Community for European Studies. Mr. Muhadi is also actively contributing to global campaign to abolish nuclear weapons with the 2017 Nobel Awarded International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. In 2022, he authored a book chapter titled The Belt and Road Initiatives and Indonesia's Response to the Rise of China. Without further ado, let us invite Mr. Muhadi.
Thank you, everyone. Dear presenters, Professor Mukhtar Masoud, Professor Kate McGregor, and Aditya Edward Jeremiah Lalisang, PhD. Welcome to our sessions. So, for some time, the Western knowledge has been dominating scientific community, and Eurocentrism has been succeeded in creating the idea of universal knowledge. And now with the rising awareness and consciousness about this reality, then more and more people, more and more scholars are getting more critical about this reality, and they start to question about the nature of knowledge. So like Mignolo, for example, encourage us to ask ourselves who and when, how and where is knowledge generated. So the session this afternoon is directed toward pursuing the idea of decolonization of knowledge from the perspective of Global South. And I'm very pleased to present three distinguished speakers. The first speaker I will introduce very shortly is Professor Mukhtar Masoud from Universitas Gadjah Mada. Professor Masoud is Emeritus Professor at the Department of International Relations at Universitas Gadjah Mada with more than 40 years teaching experience. Welcome to the session, Pak Mukhtar. He received his undergraduate degrees from Universitas Gadjah Mada and his PhD from the Ohio State Universities in 1983. Professor Mukhtar's latest monograph has the title Decolonization of the Study of International Relations, written in Indonesian, published in May in 2024, where he presents the result of thought and research to open up the possibility of knowledge production based on the condition of the South, especially related to the legacy of colonialism and oriented toward the politics of emancipation to fight for a more just world order. The second speaker will be Professor Kate McGregor. Professor McGregor, thank you for coming. for joining the session. From the University of Melbourne. She is a historian of Indonesia, based in the School of Historical and Philosophical Studies at the University of Melbourne. The Associate Dean International for the Faculty of Arts. Her interest in Indonesia is in Indonesian historiography, memories of violence, the Indonesian military, Islam and identity in Indonesia, and historical international links between Indonesia and the world. She teaches Southeast Asian history and the history of violence and ASEAN thematic history. Professor McGregor's latest monograph, Systemic Silencing, Activism, Memory and Sexual Violence in Indonesia, published in August 2023, published by the Critical Human Rights Series of the University of Wisconsin Press, focuses on transnational activism for the Indonesian so-called comfort women, and is an outcome of a 4-year Australian Research Council Future Fellowship on the project Confronting Historical Injustice in Indonesia, Memory and Transnational Human Rights Activism. This work won the 2024 New South Wales Premier General History Prize. Wow. Well, very good. Please welcome Professor McGregor. Thank you for joining us in this session. The final speaker will be Aditya Edward Jeremia Lalisang, PhD, from the University of Indonesia. Dr. Lalisang is an assistant professor in the Department of International Relations at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Indonesia. He also served as a research fellow at the Asia Research Center at the University of Indonesia. He earned his PhD from the School of International Relations and the Research School of Southeast Asian Studies at Xiamen University. His research focuses on the various dimensions and levels of China's rising influence, with a particular emphasis on Southeast Asia, and his work has been published in the Pacific Review, International Journal of China Studies, International Journal of ASEAN Studies, ASEAN Perspective, and other academic journals. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining this session, Professor Lalisang. So with all the speakers are already there, I will not spend much more time to introduce them, and let's begin with the presentation by Professor Mukhtar first. Pak Mukhtar, time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Muhathir. First, can I ask for you to put me as the last speaker, because I already embarrassed myself because I wrote something different from the title here. So in order not to, to destroy your discussion, would you put me as the third so you can invite Professor McGregor first?
We can discuss with Professor McGregor and Professor Lalisang. Professor McGregor, would you mind to be the first speaker?
No worries, no worries. I'll try.
Okay.
Sorry.
So did you say yes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I can do it.
Yeah, okay. Then followed by Dr. Lalisang, yeah? And finally, Pak Mukhtar. Okay, thank you very much. Let's begin. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Am I sharing my slides from my computer?
Yes.
I'll check. Yep, okay. Okay. All right, so thank you everybody for listening. I hope you can hear me clearly. So today, thinking about your conference theme for this year made me reflect as an historian on how people from the Global South previously worked together in the face of large challenges and uneven power structures which continue to characterize global politics today. So I believe there's much to learn from how Indonesians have navigated the changing global order over time. And one theme in my research over the last 10 years really has been to reevaluate the role of Indonesian women during intersecting periods of decolonization and the Cold War from a decentered decolonial lens. So I have a strong commitment to decentering stories of the Cold War. I think this is part of a commitment to decolonizing knowledge. In particular, I have researched the roles that Indonesian women played in charting a path of resistance in the context of the many challenges of the Cold War. So thinking about the Cold War and coloniality, I think it's important to reflect first on the concept of coloniality and then decoloniality before we proceed. So one of the most useful aspects of the term coloniality is that it signals ongoing forms of colonial power that survived beyond the formal end of colonialism or indeed remade in new ways in the global order. According to Keano, colonialism refers to Western imperial colonial expansion, which laid the foundation for modern colonial globalization and capitalism, whereas coloniality refers to the structures of power and control underpinning colonization, which persist to the present in cultural, social, economic, and political systems, including knowledge and its production. So I think that the concept of coloniality sharpens our understandings of decolonization, and it allows us to continue to question those ongoing forms of coloniality, even in independent global South countries. And also thinking about the Cold War as a period, the African scholar Nulovo Gatenshi refers also to the emergence of Cold War coloniality, a process which led countries of the global South to become, quote, entrapped in a global ideological warfare, preventing authentic political and economic formulations and creations. Now, this ideological warfare saw the competition between universalist and expansionist ideologies emanating from the Soviet Union and the United States. But it's incredibly important to also remember that there was resistance to Cold War coloniality. And of course, we might think here of the Bandung Conference, a very pivotal moment, but there were also other less visible forms of non-state activism going on. So what I wanted to do today was to briefly highlight for you some of my work on activism from women of the political left and women who were engaging in resisting not only Cold War coloniality, but also ongoing imperial forms of coloniality. So why my focus on women? Decoloniality involves paying attention to undoing structures of power, and that includes the replication of hierarchies in research, the choice of subjects, the people to whom we award agency. So histories of Indonesian foreign politics are typically written from the perspective of the role elite men played in crafting foreign policy, but we know far less about how Indonesian women forged political relationships abroad and formulated international political agendas. And that is in part due to the continuing assumption, despite the development of feminist international relations as a field of study, that women's activism doesn't constitute foreign diplomacy, or that perhaps gender is irrelevant in international relations. So again, what I wanted to do in this paper was to take us back to some earlier periods in history of geopolitical turbulence and the developments of the Cold War, and to look at how this also united women from across the globe in opposition to continuing interference in the affairs of sovereign nations, to the persistence of colonialism, economic imperialism, the rise of militarism, and the fear also of an escalating arms race and nuclear testing. So I focus here on the developing relationship between Indonesian women and women in a large international organization called the Women's International Democratic Federation. And I look at the kinds of rhetoric and activism that they shared across borders. So I'm going to speak a little bit more about the Women's International Democratic Federation mentioned here on my slide. This organization provides a very interesting example of how Cold War coloniality has operated also in terms of knowledge production, leading, in fact, at first to a long-standing neglect of this very important organization. So this organization was actually established in Paris in late November 1945 at the First World Congress of Women. You can see an image there on my slide. And the Congress was attended, in fact, by over 800 women from 41 different countries, including, a large contingent from Eastern Europe, but also from England and China, India, the United States, the Soviet Union, Spain, Finland, Poland, Greece, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. Now, what is interesting in this conference, coming out of a horrific period of war, is that many people felt united in the belief that in this post-war period, there was an opportunity for establishing a new set of core human values. And the women who founded this organization committed to these 4 key principles I've listed there: anti-fascism, lasting peace, women's rights, and better conditions for children. Now, the founders of this organization were very passionate supporters of these causes because many of them had been involved in armed resistance against Nazism and fascism in Europe, but also in Asia. And some had survived prison camps or lost husbands and children in the war. So why do I think that this organization is interesting from a decolonial point of view? In contrast to earlier transnational women's organizations that had tended to perpetuate colonialism, I'm talking here about a lot of Western-centered women's transnational organizations, what is interesting about this organization is that it in fact stood with women who were trying to decolonize their own countries. So this organization from very early on supported self-determination and a commitment also to ending racism worldwide. Despite the fact, however, that this was the largest women's organization in the post-war era, for many years it was largely neglected in scholarship. This has only begun to change in the last 15 years following the pioneering work of the Dutch feminist historian Franziska de Haan. De Haan actually explains that this was because this organization was often dismissed as simply a Soviet front, but this was due to the persistence of a Cold War assumption in the writing of scholars. So she says that many scholars actually uncritically accepted Winston Churchill's metaphor of the Iron Curtain and continued to think in terms of a sharp divide between the West and the Soviet Union, and of Eastern Europe as a big prison with no real support for socialism. But she suggests, by contrast, that there were these fascinating transnational flows of borders, across borders, of ideas, people in this period. So in the last 15 years, we've begun to see many more scholars research the national chapters of the Women's International Democratic Federation. And they've begun to show through this how the organization actually supported some extraordinary decolonial alliances, particularly between women from the global south, including the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And you can see this recently published global handbook by Palgrave there, gives a sense of some of those, that new research that people are doing on individual chapters of the WIDF. But other recent works that take up this theme about global solidarity include Elizabeth Armstrong's Bury the Corpse of Colonialism and Susie Kim's Among Women Across Worlds. Summarizing the work of these 2 authors, Kim Lawrence writes, quote, that socialist women have been erased from history of the international women's movement. When we write them back in and center Asia in the process, we arrive at a richer, more complex, and more accurate understanding of global feminism. From my own point of view, reading Franziska de Haan's work 14 years ago, I became fascinated by how Indonesian women were connected to, but also shaped by, the Women's International Democratic Federation and global activism, and how they used that network to negotiate global turbulence. So the Indonesian women who joined and became most connected to the WIDF actually came from Gowani, the Movement of Indonesian Women, an organization today which is strongly associated with communism and which, due to the New Order anti-communist propaganda, has been heavily stigmatized. But what a lot of people don't know is what this organization actually engaged in. So Gowani, which began in the form of Gerwis from 1950, focused actually on raising literacy, campaigning for equal wages in plantations, offering practical assistance through credit cooperatives and childcare. But they also had a strong international focus, and they continued to protest against, for example, continuing foreign interference in Indonesia, foreign dominance of the economy. And because of their popularity amongst Indonesian women, they actually grew to be a very large organization of 1.5 million members by 1963, with branches in every province of Indonesia and sub-branches in around 40% of villages. What is interesting from a transnational perspective is around 6 Indonesian women served on the WIDF Secretariat. So they lived and served at the headquarters of this organization in East Berlin, so they played a very important role also in shaping global politics through these roles. One prominent example here is Sujina, who spoke multiple languages and frequently wrote for the WIDF. Indonesian women also contributed articles to many of the WIDF publications, including their popular magazine called Women of the Whole World. In addition, Indonesian women participated in the WIDF congresses, which were held across the world, and that exposed them to travel, to further political activism and ideas which also of importance for their struggle for women's rights at home, as well as against imperialism. So the WIDF and the resolutions of its congresses were continually documented in Gowani's own records, and we can see through the Gowani membership card that they also highlighted their own connection to the WIDF as an important source of also international legitimacy for this organization. So just to give you some examples of how the Indonesian women actually engaged in transnational activism through the WIDF, we can see that the very first reason why they made a connection was that the Women's International Democratic Federation was one of the first organizations transnationally to support Indonesian independence. So in 1947, after they received a report from Indonesian women on renewed Dutch aggression against the Republic, the WIDF actually called on all of its member organizations, which means members across Asia, Africa, as well as Europe, and the Western world, to protest against the violation of peace in Indonesia. So given the position of many countries at this time, this was really quite an early expression of solidarity. So the greatest appeal that the WIDF had to Gowani was its inclusive attitude and also its continuing commitment to women's rights and the independence of nations. Dahan characterizes the WIDF as espousing a commitment to left feminism, meaning they critiqued the sources of women's oppression, but also wider structures of power that underpinned repression. So I think this concept of left feminism also fits fairly nicely with decoloniality. And this matched the vision of the women of Gowis, many of whom had also fought and supported the independence struggle. At the same time, they had fought for women's rights. So we can see that Gowani also played an active role in using the channels of the WIDF to challenge coloniality in the context of the geopolitical turbulence, firstly, of the Korean War. So one example of this is that in 1950, the WIDF published an unauthored update on the situation in Indonesia in its bulletin. The author, who possibly avoided using her own name due to left repression in Indonesia, was most likely Damini, a talented linguist who was serving as the first Gowis representative on the WIDF Secretariat and living in East Berlin. In her article, she claimed that following the Dutch and the Japanese, the Americans were now also exploiting Indonesia. She said, quote, "The Rockefeller Corporation owns hundreds of oil wells here. More than 1 million acres of rubber plantations belong to American monopolists." So her critique focused then on what she saw as excessive foreign investment in Indonesia and American efforts to use Indonesia to support their efforts in the Korean War. From the 1920s, the Dutch had granted American oil companies concessions, and these concessions were preserved following independence. In March 1950, the Republic also signed an agreement to take over Marshall Plan aid and to fill US stockpiling demands, thus cementing this economic cooperation with the United States. So with the outbreak of the Korean War, Americans turned to Indonesia to fill this increased demand for oil and rubber. But what this communication from an Indonesian writer tells us is how Indonesian women used their links with the WIDF to resist and publicize the fate of Indonesia to broader audiences. Another key theme of WIDF activism was opposing militarism and violence. So in 1951, interestingly, the WIDF was one of the first organizations to sponsor a commission to go to Korea and investigate what was happening during the war. In the resulting document entitled We Accuse, the committee accused South Korean, American, and United Nations allies of atrocities, including the use of weapons like napalm bombs, petrol bombs, and which were banned at the time. By 1953, until the end of the Korean War, Indonesia had also experienced an economic downturn. And the Indonesian activist Mampau Lapian spoke of rising unemployment for women in factories and plantations and other sorts of work. And she tied Indonesian poverty to liberal trade regulations. She also commented that war preparations bring poverty and unemployment, high budgets for military expenditure take away health and education for children. So you can see how the themes of her report emphasized economic exploitation, the developing Cold War, and the detriments of high defense spending. In this 1953 important Congress for the WIDF, they also formulated several resolutions which indicate the kind of tone of the international activism that Indonesian women supported. They made an appeal, for example, for an armistice for Korea to end this war, but also to end the colonial wars that were going on in Vietnam and Malaya. And you can also see here that they formulated an incredibly important document called the Declaration on the Rights of Women, which included an emphasis here on equal pay for equal work, women's right to work, access to childcare, and the right to political representation as well. So there are many more examples. I'm beginning to wind up, sorry. There have been many more examples of the writings and contributions Indonesian women on the political left made through the WIDF. I just wanted to give you one final example here of Madigdo, who was a vice president for Gowani. She provided an update on Indonesia in the 1958 Vienna conference, and you can just read the quote there. I think this is a very interesting, powerful kind of framing about how she positioned Indonesian women and all the patterns that were going on at this time in a period of global turbulence. It demonstrates to us her acute awareness of world affairs and how the Cold War and imperialism were continuing to affect the countries of Asia and Africa. And of course, at this time, we had the nationalization of the Suez Canal going on, but also the Algerian independence struggle, which was highly resonant in Indonesia. And I also want to emphasize that over time, the Indonesian chapter for the WIDF became incredibly important because they saw how much attention Gowani was attracting in Indonesia, and they actually hosted a WIDF council meeting in Jakarta in 1960. So this also, at this meeting, one of the most important topics was also disarmament and anti-nuclear activism. It wasn't the case that the WIDF and Indonesia were always aligned, and there were some points of tension, especially following the Sino-Soviet split and Indonesia's opposition, for example, to the formation of Malaysia. But to conclude, I do want to suggest that it's important not to overly romanticize an idea here of global sisterhood between progressive women throughout the WIDF. But what is interesting is that the WIDF leadership included many women from Western countries, and there were still hierarchies at work there, but its leadership did also include Asian, African, and Latin American women who were able to use this organization and their links to it in particular to promote causes for independence for their own countries, but also women's struggles. And so I believe that this organization and the links to it were also incredibly important for Indonesian women to gain visibility at home in terms of the international links and international prestige that they enjoyed. And indeed, they were upheld by the WIDF as a very important example of what could be done to increase women's activism. And I just want to end by saying I'll share some of my publications if people are interested. I'm sure the slides could be shared later. And I'll finish there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor McGregor, for this fantastic presentation. It's so amazing, in fact, that to see that, in fact, during the early days of Indonesian independence, we have already women activists at the international level as well. So, thank you very much. And I think we can go directly to the second speaker, Dr. Lalisang.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mas Muhadi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be here, especially among Professors McGregor and Professor Masood, whose work I've long admired. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my perspective as we all work toward a deeper understanding of Global South and decolonizations of knowledge. So is it me or the committee that will share the PPT? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so my engagement with the issue of Global South, with the issue of Global South and decolonizations is actually rooted in my deep interest in Indonesia's history during the 1950s and 1960s. Next slide. The decades are very vibrant and dynamic. Uh, I put the picture of a very famous movie at the time, Tiga Darah, which one of my favorite, and President Sukarno at the time was on the, spent a lot of efforts to mobilize support in trying to define Indonesian identity at that time. So this interest has led me to explore how the country as a newly independent nation emerged as a key player in international leadership, particularly through the 1955 Asia-African Conference. Indonesia took a prominent role in shaping the discourse on post-colonial solidarity. Indonesians take great pride in hosting the Bandung Conference, often viewing it through a nationalistic sense. If you remember what we have been told in our history lessons, we are told to be very proud of the organizing of this conference. This event is seen as having elevated Indonesia's status globally, supporting the independence movement of many Asian and African nations. Today, both President Sukarno and Indonesia continue to be esteemed by leaders and people across Asia and Africa for this legacy, fostering a sense of pride in Indonesia's identity. Next slide. In analyzing Indonesia's foreign policy discourse over the decades 1950s and 1960s, I uncovered a more complex narratives behind Indonesia's active promotions of Asian and African solidarity. While the goal of to build the world anew appeared to be a noble cause for humanity, supporting the independence movement across Asia and Africa, I found that Indonesia's diplomatic efforts, especially under President Sukarno, were also closely tied to the nation's material interests, such as addressing the West Papua issue. These observations aligns with the previous studies that highlight the primacy of domestic imperative in shaping Indonesian foreign policy and fits within the broader narrative of how Indonesia always tried to pursue national interests through international engagement. So it's a very, a picture of interest-based foreign policy. However, my understanding of the Bandung Conference has evolved, especially after a closer reading of Sukarno's speech during the opening of the Bandung Conference. When I read the opening line, Sukarno describes the conference as the first intercontinental conference of colored people in the history of mankind. So the word colored immediately struck me, highlighting the deeply racialized nature of global system. It became clear to me that the end of colonization did not resolve racial issues, but merely shifted their dynamics. Western powers, not yet, sorry. Western powers attempted to undermine the significance of the conference, largely because it was organized by and for former colonial subjects, which is the people of color. The realizations led me to a deeper appreciation of the Bandung nation's genuine desire to be heard, to be treated as equals, and to challenge the great power-dominated international order. In this context, I began to realize how the discipline of international relations, dominated by Western-centric perspective, has often overlooked the Bandung Conference, interpreting the conference largely through the lens of interstate competitions and power politics. This realization has been deeply personal for me, as I recognize how I, too, have perpetuated this Western-centric viewpoint in my own teaching. For years, I have taught the course of Indonesian foreign policy in the Department of International Relations, Universitas Indonesia, without even giving the Bandung Conference the comprehensive and critical explorations it truly deserved. This experience underscores how I had become overly comfortable with the predominant narratives about socio-political phenomena, reluctant to question or challenge what had long been accepted as truth. So to me, next, decolonizing knowledge begins with cultivating an awareness to question this established Eurocentrism and American centrism, the dominant narrative. My engagement with Bandung Conference served as a pathway to explore how decolonizing knowledge can be pursued within international relations. In this context, I must acknowledge that my thinking is significantly influenced by the Global IR project initiated by Professor Amitav Acharya. Next slide. In the this slide. Next one. In the 1950s and early 1960s, Indonesia frequently sent cultural missions to China. Actually, I also have a very strong interest in China studies, as I got my PhD from Xiamen University, China. And so these cultural missions are sent by President Sukarno as the broader nation-building efforts to define a sense of kebudayaan nasional atau national culture. Each mission brought together singers, dancers, and artists from various ethnic groups across Indonesia, touring multiple regions in China for 1 to 3 months. Yeah, so it is not that really typical cultural missions that Indonesia cultural diplomacy currently have. The cultural missions, Indonesian cultural missions at that time spent as long as 3 months touring many cities in mainland China. The Chinese then reciprocated by facilitating further cultural exchange. And in 1956 and 1957, as revealed by Wilcox 2017, 4 Balinese artists taught Balinese dance at the Beijing Dance Academy. And likewise, Indonesians also learned Chinese dances from renowned Chinese instructor. So the picture of at your left-hand side is actually a very famous Chinese dancers who learned to do the Balinese dance in Beijing, because President Sukarno sent a Balinese dance teacher to Beijing Dance Academy at that time. This cultural exchange went beyond simple performance. It involved intensive training and learning on both sides, embodying the Bandung spirit of mutual respect and equality. As Wilcox 2017 notes, Chinese dancers engaged deeply with foreign instructor, performing both Chinese and foreign dances for international audiences, fostering a sense of transcultural collaborations. These interactions ultimately led to what is known as transcultural creation, resulting in a new choreography that blended Indonesian and Chinese dance movement. I reflect this to my recent experience of promoting international academic collaborations and exchange. It has been quite easy for Indonesians right now to get an offer of joint research or joint publications. As we know right now, with the rising Indonesia's international profile, Indonesians provide many unique and interesting case studies corresponding to the fact that the country's expanding international profile and the country's unique positions in the issues such as, for example, climate crisis. Still, Indonesian researchers not always found themselves in equal position. A foreign researcher, for example, contacted me once after coming across with my name in Google, seeking to find an Indonesian who study China and its international engagement. This foreign researcher openly told me that it is important to collaborate with an Indonesian to improve the credibility of the project, because you need an Indonesian to be seen as credible writing about Indonesia. In this, I immediately think that researchers from Indonesia could also be seen as a mere complement. In reflecting on my recent experience promoting international academic collaborations and exchange, I've also noticed that foreign researcher recently reached out only to find an Indonesian partner that can improve the credibility of their own project. In light of this, I believe that decolonizing knowledge requires an authentic recognition of diversity without positioning it within a hierarchy. Academic collaboration should be founded on equality where all partners are respected for their unique contributions. Local researchers should not feel expected to be the sole authority on Indonesia, because in fact we are not. And engagement with international colleagues can help avoid over-reliance on any single approach or theory. Similarly, foreign collaborators should enter this partnership with a genuine intent to learn, recognizing that they too do not possess all-encompassing expertise. Next, as I pursued my interest in studying China's global engagement, particularly in Southeast Asia, I've recently came across the global China approach. This perspective facilitates discussions about China's role as an emerging superpower, moving beyond a simplistic view of China as either a threat or an opportunity. It encouraged researchers to explore the complexities of China's global interactions by acknowledging the agency of its partner countries, even those often seen as weaker in comparison to China. This approach challenges the dominant theoretical stance in international politics, which tend to overlook the agency of weaker states, assuming they must simply suffer what they must. Instead, the global China approach values the perspective and roles of these countries, these weaker countries, adding depth to our understanding of China's global impact. The concept of global China encouraged me to consider how local communities respond to the presence of Chinese agencies and the influx of significant Chinese capital. This perspective has helped me to recognize that locals are not simply passive recipients or even victims of the influx of Chinese investment. Rather, they can actively leverage the Chinese presence to their advantage. I now see that outcomes in cooperations between China as the more powerful actor and local communities as relatively less powerful need not always stem from China's initiative. Local actors are fully capable of taking the first step to engage with China for their own benefit. My research shows, so this is examples of my research. And interestingly, I do a lot of research with colleagues from Melbourne University, where Professor McGregor here from. And then my research shows that asymmetrical relationship between China and its partner do not necessarily replace China's partner in passive roles. In fact, these partners can significantly influence the outcomes of cooperations, underscoring the importance of local agency in shaping global interactions. Reflecting on my engagement with this global China approach, I believe that decolonizing knowledge requires us to embrace complexity rather than an either-or framework. This approach also guards against defaulting to dominant theoretical narratives, fostering a more nuanced understanding. Furthermore, decolonization should involve recognizing the role of less powerful actors who, despite their position, possess agency and can actively shape outcomes even within asymmetrical relationships. I argue this commitment to ensuring international partnership on equal footing, questioning dominant theoretical narratives, and adopting alternative approaches to understanding social political phenomena should serve as a foundational principle before mobilizing resources for ambitious projects such as developing an Indonesian School of International Relations. Next, the current pursuit of developing an Indonesian School of International Relations has become increasingly prominent. However, my observation suggests that these efforts often lack a strong theoretical foundations, focusing primarily on surface-level explorations of Indonesian historical experiences and local case studies. While this approach does align with global IR commitments to representing diverse perspective in IR, it sometimes emphasizes merely that Indonesia can also develop their own theories. Indonesia can also have their own IR theory. There are unique and deserve distinct recognitions. Without clearly articulating how this theoretical development might contribute to the broader IR discipline. However, I believe it is worth considering that the effort to develop an Indonesian school of IR might in some ways represent our own attempt to decolonize international relations. Just last month, I visited an exhibition at an Indonesian museum focused on Lenso, the dance created by Sukarno in early 1960s. According to the researcher and curator behind the exhibition, Lenso should be considered as Sukarno's project to decolonize Indonesian music and dance. Many people think that Sukarno created this type of music and dance simply to define what should be considered as Indonesian music, Indonesian dance, especially as he opposed Western influence strongly during the early 1960s. By introducing Lenso, he aimed to challenge the West through culture. During the exhibitions, I had the chance to discuss with the curator. I argued that labeling Sukarno's Lenso project solely as decolonization's effort oversimplifies his motivations because he was mainly driven by his own nationalistic desire to assert Indonesia's identity in opposition to the West. The curator, however, maintained that Sukarno's intentions to decolonize music in Indonesia was clear, though the curator considered that Lenso remains an unfinished decolonization project, as Sukarno was forced to step down before fully realizing his vision. In this slide, he argued, we cannot entirely deny that Lenso, the dance and the music, had decolonization's intentions. Reflecting on these conversations, I wonder if our effort right now to establish an Indonesian school of IR might also be seen in a similar way. Indonesians are currently engaging in a process of rethinking the use of Western-centric theories to study international relations, an early step in decolonizing the discipline. I argue it is too soon to predict whether this project will ultimately succeed, but I think it is important to recognize that we are making the effort. As for the outcome, that remains to be seen. But I think right now Indonesians are more focused on developing ambitious projects rather than taking a small step, taking a more fundamental steps, developing the habit to question, developing the habit to always avoid being comfortable with the dominant perspective in developing its own in research and in teaching as well about international relations. I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Dr. Lalisang, for a wonderful presentation. It's quite interesting to see how decolonization as a political project can be pursued in different ways and in different aspects, including in the music, apart from that in the academic as well. So let's go to the final speaker, Professor Mukhtar Masud.
Thank you, Pak Muhadi. Good afternoon for me. My appreciation for Professor Gregor Mas Direna. I think we met in Beijing, yeah, long time ago. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I made a big mistake today, but let me start with this. My concern with the IR studies in Indonesia started with the fact that I learned a long time ago that in 1955, Indonesian politician, Indonesian leader managed to to hold a big gathering in Bandung, talking about the newly independent countries back then, some of them even not independent. And they came up with the 10 principles that basically now we can put that principle in the category of critical theory. Basically, it's about how that was 57. Gajah Mada University revised the at Gajah Mada University
There is a technical problem with connection from Pak Mokhtar. So while waiting for the connection to come back, I have a suggestion. There have been some questions raised by participants. Would it be possible if I start reading the question to both Professor McGregor as well as to Dr. Lalisang? Professor McGregor? Koneksi kita ya.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So there is a question raised by participant to you from UGM. It's from Ida Mujtahidah. She raised a question. Oh, Professor Mokhtar is already there? Okay. Sorry. Let's continue with Professor Mokhtar then.
Okay, sorry about this.
Yeah, please, Pak.
My connection is not good. Let me repeat what I said. In 1955, we have already produced a document consists of 10 principles that basically can be put in the category of critical theory, which is emancipatory in nature. But in 1957, when Gajah Mada University revised the curriculum for studying IR, the revision was done by a group of scholars from Johns Hopkins University. And of course, they emphasize American style of international relations, especially by using Hans Morgenthau textbook that was only 9 years back then, the politics among nations, but no reference at all about Bandung Conference. So the problem here is back then, the politicians are more ready to talk about decolonizing politics and knowledge, but the scholars at the University of Gajah University back then, was not yet ready for that, because our curriculum since 1957 up to now mostly designed, well, of course there's some revision lately, but mostly still in Western mode of knowledge production. Yeah, that's the idea. I have produced a simple monograph studying about this, but today, because of my misreading of the guidance of the committee, I wrote a different topic that but also related to the turbulence that we are facing soon. Well, people expect that there will be turbulence soon, that coming from United States. Okay, that's the idea about my PowerPoint. So this is very different from Mas Jeremias and Professor McGregor, but that's what I have today. So would you please show my PowerPoint? Well, we start from the first. Okay. Again, I'm not sure, but lately I'm strongly tempted by what happened in the United States. And now we know that they will have a new leader. Of course, that is their problem, but because this happened in the United States, that it might be good for us to discuss it, because somehow Indonesia and others in the world somehow will be affected by that. I put here the Jakarta Post picture with the word Trump returns, and interestingly, the picture that was put there, it a person with fearful. I think that's the nature of the picture. So it seems that Trump returns equal to dread, equal to apprehension, equal to fear. That's, I think, what the Jakarta Post would like to tell us. Okay, please. Well, that is a topic. What Trump's return to power mean for us, and its impact on the management of global order, and challenges and opportunities for the global south, and what we can do about it. Please. Well, you know it already. Since the 1945, the world arena was dominated by American power, and American power that managed to create a world order on the basis of Western liberal ideology. But since Vietnam War up to War on Terror, the American grip on power has diminished. already in late 1980s, politicians as well as scholars started talking about America as an overstretched superpower. And we need to understand the background to discuss about what happened in the United States today. Trump's phenomenon of today is part of this history. Okay. What would Trump do in its second administration to rectify its to rectify American problem, especially for us concerning American relation with other nations, please. And how do we know what Trump would do in its second administration? We can use two documents. First, document published by the Heritage Foundation titled Project 2025 that during the debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, Trump tried to distance himself from this project, from this publication, but somehow people know the relation between Trump and this group. The second document is America First Agenda, authored by America First Policy Institute. And this publication, this by two institutions, are very conservative, and in terms of political leaning, they are both very right wing. Please. And this is the project. Basically, what they want President Trump do is streamlining the bureaucracy. So scale down many kind of type of bureaucratic works in order for the president can manage the administration more efficiently and more easier. On climate change, the project proposed that America, United States, should abandon, the effort to rectify the problem of the environment, because that is not American business. Next, please. And you know it already, big tech will be regulated, especially those from the China. And then taxes will be cut, especially for big corporation. Next, please. And on Federal Reserve, the document proposed to get rid of government's control of the nation money, and we try to propose also to return to the gold standard in order to make the value of dollar more stable. For us, the more important is on foreign relation. And you know it already that President Trump very very strong in terms of opposing China and opposing international organization and many international activities that he was not involved before. So threatened to get out of UN, to get out WHO, and many others international institutions. Next, please. That was from the American Heritage Project 2025, and this one from America First agenda. I think many of the point repeated here, including imposing tariff on imported goods, lowering corporate tax, protecting religious freedom, to free, school from non-religious activity, increasing domestic oil and gas production, getting rid of climate change effort, opposing policies supporting transgenders, right? Opposing any gun control measures, and imposing work requirement for Medicaid recipient, this is about health services, curbing immigration. Even President Trump already promised to expel immigrants. About 1 million of them will be deported outside. And reducing America's role in assisting with international conflict. Basically, United States will be directed toward isolationism. Okay. Although America First agenda is overall less extreme than Project 2025, both agendas largely align in their value, and they are very conservative in that sense. Both suggest Trump should broadly overhaul federal workforce with the goal of making those who work for American government are or will be loyal only to Donald Trump. So civil servants will be made into political appointees, okay, that will abide by President Trump's order. That's the idea of these two. Please. Will President Trump implement that? There is no guarantee that President Trump will adopt it, the suggestion by the two documents, but if the past is prologue to the present, and if the past is prologue to the future, Trump will listen to at least some of them. Because before, Heritage Foundation already made similar proposal for Trump ahead of his presidency in 2016. And President Trump followed 64% of its recommendation. That way, we can be sure that the two agenda will be considered as the blueprint for second Trump administration. And yeah, next please. The most important for us to see here is about international trade. And this is why is it so? Because this is the point that Trump will put a special emphasis on. Okay, so what will Trump do? Trump's concern is with the trade deficit of American goods, economic export-import. So Trump's policy is to use punitive tariff that were used regularly during his previous term in office, 2017 to 2021. Based on the belief that US is stronger when it works alone, Trump will impose punitive tariff of special product, mostly the product, the good, the commodity from China. And Trump will put blanket tariff up to 20% on import from all countries. Tariff on Chinese import in excess of 60% that will be applied. And to end China's most favored nation trading status. This is really about opposing China. Who will be the victim? Who will be the most exposed to the protectionist policy? Basically, countries that are dependent on global trade, especially those that have large trade surpluses with the US, are going to be the first victims. According to EIU, Economist Intelligence Unit, prepare an index, and they call it Trump's Risk Index. According to Economist Intelligence Unit, 10 countries, Mexico, China, Canada, Vietnam, Germany, Japan, Taiwan, India, Ireland, and South Korea will be the most victimized. Mexico even will be punished by 100% tariff. That's according to the EIU. As Southeast Asia has an average trade to GDP ratio of 90%, meaning that we Southeast Asian are highly trade dependent, we almost certain will suffer from the US protectionist policy. And this is something that we learn from the EIU Trump Risk Index. Now, how do you measure whether this or that country will be exposed to President Trump's protectionist policy? And from EIU, we know that the closer the country to the US and or more reliant on the US, the higher its exposure to changes expected under Trump's second presidency. This is why Mexico and Canada, become the victim, because they are the closest and they have a lot of surpluses. The more distance or less reliant ties with the US, the lower its exposure to changes expected under President Trump. Now, yes, of course, Indonesia is so far from United States, but still we are internationally dependent on trade. See, that's I think we will see also the impact here. EIU also add another category, political sensitiveness of commodity. For American protectionists, steel, aluminum, and cars, automotive, are politically sensitive. And more politically sensitive commodities, more restriction will be put by President Trump. Politically sensitive because Bethlehem Steel went bankrupt because many American imported steel from South Korea, from China, from Germany, and it is very sensitive politically because voters for American election, from the trade union are very aggressive in terms of, stopping import from overseas, especially for steel, aluminum, and automotive. Accordingly, exported to the US of politically sensitive items such as steel, aluminum, and automotive will be exposed directly to Trump protectionist policy, meaning that they are the one will be the victim of that. Now, let me go back to the global south. What is to be done for us? And I don't have many ideas. I just put two things here. The thing that we have done already. First, political action. The global south should shape its own path, just like what we do in Bandung 1955. So action in the direction of global south-led multipolar order. That's the idea. And we have done it, several times. So this is nothing new about this. The US expected retreat for multilateral organization would create a vacuum in the Western dominated order. That's why we have a chance. There's an opportunity to develop here. The shift might allow the global south to explore a multipolar framework that better align with its interests. And we have China and Russia that show sympathies to us, and that might be also one way of organizing or reorganizing world order by the help of China and Russia. Countries in the global south may strengthen their regional alliance. This could lead to a rise in South-South cooperation, as well as increased opportunities for China and other powers to assume leadership role and global governance, promoting model that diverge from Western ideal. China will be very happy to take this, leadership for us, but we don't know it yet. Please. And this go back to the theme of this. We need to study IR for the sake of the global south. But sometimes when we talk about global south, somehow people mention about a space, a place. That's why sometimes people mention about a BRICS as part of the global south. Let me reiterate here, we need to emphasize that as a concept, the global south does not merely denote a rigid grouping nation, rigid grouping of nation. The global south is an organizing principle to seek for a more just international economy and world order. The concept denotes a set of countries beset by dominance of what we call now global north through political economy and economic exploitation. This is what we will see during President Trump's 201. President Trump 2.0, next year. because many of the protectionist policy that's suggested by Project 2025 and Project America First are directed against the global south. Global south portrayed the global order as created let me say it again. What we see now is a global order created by wealthy and politically powerful subset of nations. Such nations, from this perspective, built their positioning through economic exploitation of the rest of the world, particularly through imperial rule, and subsequently continued to maintain this unequal positioning. I think that's what I want to say, Pak Muhadi, and I wait for questions for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Mohtar, for bringing the new development in the context of decolonization of knowledge with the rise of Donald Trump, which I think there is a question raised here about the impact of the Donald Trump for the decolonization effort that we are aspiring for. So there are many questions raised in the chat box, but I would like also to invite participants to raise your hand if you would like to respond to the presentation, either a general response or to specific response to Professor McGregor, Dr. Lalisang, or Professor Mohtar Masood. So, okay, there is one participant raising his or her hand. Okay. Who is the Saidul? Okay. I give you the opportunity to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Wadi, for the opportunity. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Arditya, especially about the development of international relations school in Indonesia. So basically, I agree with Mr. Aditya about the developing theory for international relations, especially in Indonesia. But I would like to ask about what is the actual challenge to develop this kind of theory? Is it because we have a lot of culture, we have a lot of race, or we have a lot of local wisdom, or maybe that the challenge is the academics already to enjoy the practical research that the popular one. And also, I would like to ask the questions about how, if we develop the theory of international relations in Indonesia, how this theory can support, how can this theory can boost the decolonization of the knowledge in Indonesia. I think that's my question for especially for Mr. Aditya. Thank you. Back to Mr. Muhammad.
Right, the second participant.
Bu Firda, please.
Okay, thank you for the time. Maybe I want to have a question to Miss Kate McGregor. Okay, maybe now currently I'm also assisting several women victims of 1965. I gained a lot experience from the program. I strongly believe that the issue very closely related to decolonization of knowledge that is trying to be reduced and standardization without us failing it, and I believe that Indonesia has knowledge that might not have been considered knowledge in the status quo era. How can I local Indonesia knowledge also be recognized and become knowledge that can be agreed upon together? For example, Indonesia has a concept of people economic, and who do we need to start to mainstreaming this theory or this knowledge? I think that's, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Allen, you can pose your question now.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, committee, and also for the distinguished speakers. So my question is, okay, so the background is Indonesia is struggling to develop the economy to become high income country. And right now Indonesia is still trapped in, Indonesia is still, well, located, is still in middle income country. Indonesia is still a middle income country, and also there are a lot of countries have exactly the same conditions with Indonesia. And my question is regarding that, global South countries I think global South countries are facing two dilemmas. First dilemma is they have to boost their economy, but at the same time they have to be in line with SDGs. For example, environmental issues, human rights issues, but at the same time they have to boost their economy. I think this is kind of confusing because wouldn't it be hard for those global South countries? And what do you think about the solution for those global South countries? Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much.
The rest to which speaker? Any specific reference of the speaker who would like you to address the question?
No, it's
Okay.
anyone can
Yeah.
answer my
Okay.
question. Thank you, sir.
So, Professor McGregor, Professor Mohtar, and Dr. Lalisang, there are three questions posed by the participants. I would like to give you the opportunity. First to Professor McGregor.
Thank you very much for the question, Durga. So interesting to hear that you're working with survivors of 1965. My own entry point for this research was that I was also researching the 1965 violence, and I guess I was focusing a lot on what had happened to the political left in Indonesia, and what had happened after 1965. But then I found these incredible stories about what people had done in the 40s and 50s. So it was a process of discovery for me. And in studying the 40s and 50s, again, I'm sort of at 40s to 60s. I think it was a remarkable period in world history, and a remarkable period where people were trying to renegotiate, as is mentioned by the other speakers. As the world was decolonizing, new powers were also trying to negotiate their place in the world. But I think it's incredibly important to look at how people from different levels of society were negotiating that changing geopolitical context as well. And so looking at the ideas that people had then, or even the directions across, Asia, Africa, like the fact that there was an attempt to create, African Asian Writers Bureau or Journalist Bureau to think about different perspectives on the world. So I think when we're thinking about decoloniality and what might we learn, you mentioned there, what might we learn from Indonesian concepts? for me, it's not only about Indonesian concepts or at a sort of nationalist level, but also the concept of decoloniality, I think refers us to the fact that we should recognize multiple forms of knowledge, not just Indonesian versus Australian or whatever, but within societies as well. And perhaps also gendered forms of knowledge, that could be another lens, or also other forms of knowledge. In my own country, of course, we're trying to pay more attention also to Indigenous sources of knowledge, but I think it's important to recognize multiple forms of knowledge rather than attempting to get one form of knowledge to usurp another version. Although I do take the points made by Lalang before about the dominance of Western knowledge, and also Pak Mokhtar, maybe in terms of international relations. I'm less familiar with that field, but even as an historian working on Indonesia, I know how much I struggle sometimes, even amongst my colleagues, to make them understand how many exciting things came from Indonesia and Indonesian thinkers. So I think it's about I think it's also about thinking about our curriculums. What do we teach our students, and centering them to get to read voices from across the world, not just our own societies, but other societies from very different perspectives. There is so much to learn, especially for our students, to enrich their understanding, which, given the turmoil that we're facing right now, and you mentioned President Trump, Pak Mokhtar, it's so important that we understand the complexity of societies by looking at multiple viewpoints. And again, looking at the structures of power behind those viewpoints. So, sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but in general, thanks for the question.
Lisang, could you respond to the question?
Yeah, thank you, Saidul, for your questions. I think the biggest challenge for Indonesian scholars to start develop or to start the decolonization IR project in Indonesia is to find the space and time and resources in the context of liberalizations of higher educations in Indonesia. This kind of project sometimes is not considered as important. That's why UGM's commitment in promoting this kind of project is very admirable in my understanding. It provides me the time and space to rethink how the way we teach about IR, the way we study IR, and what kind of perspective that we always tend or feel that it is always our comfort zone, rather than questioning them in our research activities. So the biggest challenge is really the space to simply start the project. And then the second challenge, in my understanding, is a very strong nationalistic sentiment among Indonesians themselves. We always think that we just need Indonesian IR school because China already has one, and India is even is about to have another IR school, and Universitas Indonesia should have an IR school because UGM already started earlier, for example. So this kind of feeling of competition among ourselves is also another challenge. Rather than pursuing collaborations, we always, in the context of, again, liberalizations of higher education in Indonesia, competitions doesn't provide positive contributions to any collaborative efforts to decolonize IR in Indonesia, in my understanding. And the third challenge will be if we complete this project and we do own or we can contribute one particular Indonesian IR theory, then the second challenge will be the applicability in the context beyond Indonesia itself. So it requires as well Indonesian scholar to foster international exchange and collaborations, to always find the time and resources to have an exchange with international community, strengthening cross border interactions, and the most important thing is transdisciplinary pursuits should also be encouraged in supporting this kind of project, in my understanding. Thank you so much.
Respond. Pak Mohtar, would you like to respond?
Yeah. Well, I think Mas Jeremias already mentioned about the problem with this, especially that we are not collaborating enough in this. But the issue, I think, still, the problem with the IR studies is about what we call epistemic colonialization. Okay. The way we imagine, the way we think, still within the Western Western way of thinking. Yeah. Some of us already, in other scientific activities in history, in sociology, already started with this. What they do is to find the local or indigenous concept about something. Ben Anderson from Cornell University, long time ago, helped the Javanese to think again about the concept of power. And I think in 1970s, the idea was very popular among young scholars. Yeah, but up to now, I don't see that is applied in IR. Yeah, we are still trying to do that, but again, because according to Mas Jeremias, we are doing things, independently, without knowing what others doing, like in Kacamata and Universitas Indonesia. It's basically, the same institution doing the same thing, but we very rarely collaborate about this. Yeah, that's, I think, one of the problems, especially because this is about way of knowing, yeah, way of thinking about something. Yeah. Thank you, Pak Mati.
I think I know I will go to the question posed through the chat box. I will read some of them because there are so many questions. So I will start with two general questions addressed to all the speakers. The first is a very basic question, but it is problematic. The question is, what does decolonization mean? Is it referring to creation theory? Is it a mere recognition of the colonized nation history? Or is it just criticizing Western nature of one theory? And then related to that, the one question that hardly addressed by decolonization move is the question of agency. When we decolonize IR, most of the time it means creating and recognizing non-Western knowledge and experience. However, whose experience and knowledge? Is it the ruling class of the global South countries, or is it the oppressed one? So this is quite a basic question that need to be addressed, and it will be addressed to all the speakers. And the second question is about the difference between decolonization of knowledge and the localization of knowledge, and how the global South can increase their participation in the knowledge production. Okay, so this is addressed to all the speakers.
Can I address address it first because I think I will have the shortest answer
Yeah,
because I
okay.
think it will be the most prominent one to answer this question. In my understanding, it's all of them. So it's simply all of them. It is about it's about critique of Western centrism. It is about encouragement to see diversity. It is about encouraging the voiceless to be heard. So in my understanding, it's all of them. And sometimes this terminology is overused simply to and misunderstood in general as as mobilized efforts to fight against the West. To be in my understanding, there is an element of it, but it cannot be simplified only with the struggle against to fight against the West. So I think in a more complex way we can understand decolonization's efforts in a more complex and nuance as simply what the questions mentioned before, and whose experience and knowledge. I think it is also important to address that kind of issues because if we talk about decolonizations in Indonesia, do you think the process of decolonizations in Indonesia has completed after 1945? The answer is completely no, because there are still oppressed communities in Indonesia, and there are still mindset to prioritize someone in a more higher positions in comparisons to the other communities. Yeah, and frankly speaking, can we say that the colonization process in Indonesia is over when there is still a problem in Papua, where there is still an oppression and suppression? So the answer is completely no. Then I think we have to consider all layers of voices to acknowledge that diverse voices across social classes. It is important, and decolonizations mandate us to do that kind of thing, I guess. Thank you.
Pak Mokhtar or Prof. McGregor?
Professor McGregor.
Well, thank you. I think I would have a very similar answer actually, and I to our first speaker there, I just will repeat one line that I said in my paper, that if we use the concept of decoloniality, it involves paying attention to undoing structures of power. So when we use the concept of coloniality, it is referring to colonial structures of power, but also the ways in which they could be replicated in a post-independent, post-colonial nation, as just mentioned by the previous speaker. And that is why when we go to the question of agency, looking at the voices and experience of the most marginalized people will actually give us the most insight into those structures of power. So this is an interesting kind of, connected question, really. How do we get at that? And again, I want to reinforce that, again, it's not about the national level. Actually, again, moving to the periphery of a nation, we also find really interesting insights. So in some of my latest research examining how Indonesians reflect on colonial history, then we get very different insights from Eastern Indonesia or different parts of Indonesia. So if we keep using that word decentering knowledge as well, it helps us. And in Indonesia, decentering might also be taking perspectives outside Java. What are those dynamics? But also thinking of periods before the New Order, where the New Order also was brought into development discourse, etc. We get different levels of discourse, and we get different exposure to ways of seeing the world. So I think it's really always about unpacking, looking at the margins, looking for agency at different levels, and also in thinking about structures of power. It may be about wealth, economics, but also about gender. Multiple forms of power are operating here. So we need to be aware and thinking about that all the time, I think. Yeah, that's my answer.
Mokhtar?
Thank you. The critique of colonial or the critique of political independence is about the the structural, political, and social impact of the colonial regime. So yes, we are independent. We have our own leaders, but the way our new leaders, the way they behave, the way they do, is just like the colonial power holders before. That's why when I go back to my notes here, we learn from people like Gross Fouquet. This is about when we talk about coloniality, we have coloniality of knowledge, coloniality of power, and coloniality of being. Okay, so when we talk about the coloniality, then because I study coloniality in terms of IR studies, then when we talk about the coloniality power, we talk about the racial hierarchy and epistemology that attached to the structural hierarchy. So when we talk about the agency, when we talk about the knowledge based on Indonesian experience, to learn about Indonesian IR, we have to be careful because many of those pundits, many of those writers in IR mostly are come from the elite class, and that's there is no way of dealing with this except by encouraging people from different classes to learn about that at the university. And that's in Indonesia is not very difficult to have that. So we have many kind of learners from different of classes to learn about IR. But because we don't manage it in a systematic way, so they just learn and then practice what they learn in accordance to what profession they will take. And that's because I don't start learning more seriously yet, but that's a problem in Indonesia because of this. So we are not talking about the coloniality of power. We are talking about coloniality of knowledge, and we know it already. Like up to now, textbook for Indonesian student, even though that is written in Indonesian, but still this is basically a translation of Western concept in that. So we are still waiting for a scholar who mentioned about it. Let me put it this way. When Indian scholar talking about realism, they have reference that's already 2500 years old. Yeah, Kautilya Arthasastra. That now we have that in Indonesia. Problem is we don't read the alphabet used in that. So we still need to learn from archaeologists about the sources of knowledge. of our own. And we don't do it yet. So that's my response to the problem of whose knowledge that we learn. I remember a scholar who wrote about history of Banten. The first was a Dutch scholar. I'm not sure, 1800 something. But then the book was read by a Bantenese aristocrat, and he himself went to the Netherlands and studied Indology, and then wrote another book on Banten. Okay. And 1970 something, another historian wrote the same history in Indonesian by Professor Sartono. Now you have different way of telling the same story. Now, I try to understand Professor Sartono as part of the decolonizing, the way of seeing about Banten, but I do not know how, because what I see there is three different perspectives on the same history. The first is the perspective of a Dutch administrator turned into scholar that report about Banten. The second was about I'm talking about Hussein Jayatiningrat, son of Bantenese aristocrat who wrote about its own dynasty history. And then Professor Sartono wrote from the perspective of peasant in Banten. And, well, actually, I don't read all of them. I only read the Professor Sartono. But what I heard about that is, this is if you call it as a decolonizing knowledge about Banten history, this is about perspective. So this is about decolonizing the way of seeing, the way of understanding history of Banten. And if that can be used as an example, then we are still waiting for somebody in IR writing Indonesian struggle for independence or Indonesian or foreign relations during the New Order, from Indonesian perspective. That's, I think, the generation of Mas Jeremias can do that. I'm already 75. I don't expect much from me. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I talked too long. Thank you, Pak Muhadi.
Pak Motar, there are actually more hand raised and more questions would be raised as well, but given the limitation of time, then I will not open any longer time for questions. So then we have to close the session. But before we close the session, I really enjoy the conversation in this session where all the speakers presented very interesting ideas. The decolonization of knowledge, which is actually much more complex than what we many of us initially understood. When we are thinking about decolonization of knowledge, people immediately think about de-westernizing the knowledge and so on and so on. So it is very clear that Western domination is the point of departure for the decolonization of knowledge. But when we go deeper into the research, it is clearly that it is not as simple as that, because when we talk about the decolonization of knowledge with the result of the Indonesian version of IR or Chinese version of IR, it is not something that we are going to expect from the decolonization of knowledge, except decolonization of knowledge is motivated mostly by the aspiration for more just and without any domination of one particular knowledge. So I thanks to the speakers for this wonderful presentation, and I would like the participants to join me in appreciation to the speaker. Thank you very much, and I will give the microphone to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muhadi, for sharing this discussion. And before we close the convention, we would like to encourage all the participants in the Zoom meeting to open their camera, because we want to have a picture to memorize this momentous event. And please, to all the participants, please open the camera. And all the committees, please, you can sit in front of the logo of Universitas Gadjah Mada, Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik. Please, all participants, it's we have 4 slides, so we will take 4 pictures. And ready? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Slide number 2. Ready? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Slide number 3. Don't forget to, make your hair. Okay, slide number 3. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. The last slide. 3, 2, 1. And thank you, everyone. And to close the convention today, I would like to highlight Sukarno in his opening address at the Asian African Conference in Bandung on April 18, 1955. He also called for Asian and Africans to unite. Sukarno said at that moment, "Let us remember that the stature of all mankind is diminished so long as nations or parts of nations are still unfree." And that signifies the end of our annual convention on the Global South 2024. And see you at the convention in 2025. Have a good evening.
Kate, thank you so much, Kate, Yere, Pak Mohtar.
Terima kasih.
Great to see you.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Balik.
Terima
Bye-bye.
kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Mohtar. Thank you.
Sehat-sehat Pak Mohtar. Kapan ke Beijing lagi? Harus bolak-balik ke Cina loh, Pak.
Itu dia. Kalau ke sana mesti tukang menyembuhkan ya, Bu. Orang tua ke sana berobat ya.
Iya,
Nah,
Pak.
Oke.
terima
Oke,
kasih
terima
Tunggu ya,
kasih
Pak.
semuanya.
Makasih,
Terima kasih
tenang
semua
semua.
partisipan
Makasih Mas
semua.
Ain,
Yo,
Mbak
sure.
Rere.